Hi there and welcome to the We Are Change talk show. I thank you for joining me. We have another great guest for you today, Vinny Eastwood from the Vinny Eastwood Show. He's very well known in New Zealand and around the globe for exposing corruption. So let's go to the interview now. Thanks for joining me on this simultaneous broadcast, Vinny. You've been one of New Zealand's top journalists and truth tellers for many years. How are you going today?
Really a bit tired actually. I was up late last night with my best mate, just chilling out.
Right, and what we're witnessing now is mass genocide, and these criminals that we elect are the ones that are committing this. We're being hit hard and ravaged by bushfires in many parts of the country. And it looks like it's all Geo Engineering that's causing this, and I believe some of the smoke has even drifted down to New Zealand as well, and people are inhaling it down there. And we're seeing a lot of cutthroat people jumping in. They're overcome by greed. They're trying to sell water at top dollar at service stations and convenience stores. A lot of people are ruthless and a lot of looting is taking place. People that are opportunistic want to jump in and take advantage of the victims that are really suffering. So it's a combined level of attack and a lot of desperate times. People don't know which way to turn, and that's what makes it so much more alarming. It's hard to think clearly for a lot of these people. They're in extreme dire need of help and the help isn't there.
We're talking about the Australian bushfires. I'm here on the We Are Change talk show with Jeff O'Toole in Melbourne. And the work Max Egan's been doing on these bushfires is, it's phenomenal. Essentially, it's very much like when the Christchurch mosque massacre happened, and I was Johnny on the spot, doing heaps of interviews, getting the information, got there on the ground. I did my part because that's where I was. I was the truth guy in New Zealand, the only one there, and so I had to do the job, and I did the job better than anybody else in the world. And Max is doing the exact same thing here. It's his part of the world, it's his responsibility, and he's doing a bang-up job of it, really doing so many broadcasts about it. I think I've watched maybe 3 of his longer episodes on the bushfires at the moment. And it's good that he is covering all the aspects, the Agenda 21, the sparkler bombs, the fireballs, the directed energy weapons, the Greens, the climate change activism and things of that nature. So the climate change element is quite funny. If you think genocide is actually quite funny, but which I do, my shtick is the lighter side of genocide because you've got to have a laugh about these things. But the climate change activists appear to absolutely believe, that human beings are a disease, all right, and need to be killed. But of course, they won't kill themselves. They'll just want to kill other people, like people in Africa or the third world and other areas, and prevent them from having stable electricity, which might save their lives. Because these greenies have grown up all their life with electricity that runs 24 hours a day. Okay? That's not a staple for the world. I mean, my brother lives in Tahiti, in French Polynesia, and having blackouts and brownouts and all of that kind of stuff is a regular occurrence. And we don't know how good we've got it. And so what's happened is you've got a whole bunch of pampered people who want to tell everybody else what to do with their life because they have no idea what to do with their own. All right? And politics is filled with people like this. People who have huge problems, mentally, socially, economically, just people with huge problems. And instead of working on themselves or solving those problems, they want to go out and solve the world's problems, because I can't solve any of my problems, but surely I can solve the world's. They're just naive and stupid and dangerous, frankly.
They're very misinformed, and they believe they're doing the right thing, going out there and, you know, protesting this climate change scenario. They're trying to use that as an excuse. And then they'll use Australia as a prime example. Look, if we don't take these measures and implement these methods now, you've seen what happened to Australia when it was all 100% engineered. So it's very calculated, and it's all done by design. And that's the scary thing about it. People buy into it, and they believe the propaganda that's being fed to them. They swallow it hook, line and sinker. They get out there and they say, look, climate change is real. They see Greta on the world stage, and you know that's what rings home. And if you try and go against that, it makes the person look sinister that's telling them no, climate change isn't real. It makes them look like they don't care. But yeah, you did a fabulous effort on the ground there at New Zealand after the Christchurch massacre, covering that day in and day out. It takes true journalism to get the information out to the people, and sadly the journalists that are doing that are far and few between. And you know, people switch on their television sets and that's all they get is a brainwashing system from mainstream media. So it's good to have these channels, and hopefully we can avoid any further YouTube censorship and keep getting the information out to the people, because the policies that they've implemented are hitting truth channels hard, and a lot of people are being demonetised. But we just have to persevere and keep jumping through these hoops to get the information out, don't we?
And it's about supporting each other as well. I mean, I've had a number of fights with journalists and other activists and things like that in New Zealand. And the thing is, you become an activist not because you're basically for the same reason those politicians do, okay? But with the opposite reason, all right? Activists get hurt and damaged and destroyed by something, or they see it happen to somebody else and they're compelled to do something about it, anything, on a day-to-day basis. But unfortunately, just like the politicians and various other people who go out and try to save the world and stuff like that, they've got problems, mental, social, economic, whichever it might be, that makes them very, very difficult to work with. I'm very difficult to work with. You know, I get panic attacks if I get job interviews and things like that. I haven't been able to work for 10 years. But in that 10 years, I've created the largest online archive of interviews with New Zealand activists in history. Right?
Very proud of that.
So, you know, somebody else might have just worked for 10 years and they might have built themselves a house. I've worked for 10 years and I've essentially built a media catalogue that might perhaps save future generations from having to wonder about this stuff and have no interviews with people who knew about it at the time to listen to. So, you know, when it comes down to the Australian fires and things like that, there's a narrative. Okay, so the narrative is the fires were caused by climate change. Oh, the climate change, the frickin' forest just burst into flames. See, it's just that simple.
Very false narrative, isn't it?
Oh, it's thought provoking, and I mean, like the whole idea is, and somebody brought this up when it comes to Donald Trump, build the wall or deep state or anything like that. It's thought cancellation. Okay, and I'd never heard that term used before. Thought cancelling statements. So once people say it's climate change that's responsible, that kind of thing, no more thoughts occur, because when people actually start thinking, that's when they start wondering about whether or not the things that you're saying are actually true, and lo and behold, it turns out that they're actually BS. So, yeah, stopping people from questioning, stopping people from listening to us, that kind of thing, is a big, big priority. And we've got much, much smaller audiences, much, much smaller channels. But the difference being that there's this thing called the Pareto distribution. Jordan Peterson was talking about this. The Pareto distribution is basically a scientific principle, or a sociological principle, really, but it's nonetheless true. It holds that a very, very, very small, tiny minority of people will do the vast, 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 vast majority of the work. Okay? So if you are one of those people who's doing the huge amount of work, keep doing it, because there ain't nobody else.
Yeah, sadly that's the case. People don't take the initiative. Critical thinking is at an all-time low, and people have to look outside the square, not just take on the first information that they're given as truth. Do their own due diligence and look at the bigger picture as well. Zoom out. Who stands to benefit from the fires? What do they hope to gain out of this? And they have to really look at that. People, I guess, are really naive and too trusting of their government. Even after the atrocities have been committed, they still look at mainstream media and they take that on board, whether that's due to time restrictions or they just haven't looked into other areas and done their own research. But sadly that's what we're up against, not just a corrupt government and mainstream media, but people suffering from cognitive dissonance as well. They always throw up resistance. They try and challenge people that are doing this really great work. So, I mean, there's so many barriers to overcome. But, you know, we have to persevere and just try and rise above all the negativity, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been telling me that lately. Oh, Vinny, you got to stop being negative. You got to stop talking about the problems. You got to start coming up with solutions and all of that kind of stuff. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure you guys live in this place called reality like I do, yeah. But it exists, and it doesn't give a fuck what you think. It doesn't give a fuck what you believe. Okay, that's reality. It doesn't care. So when people tell me stop being negative or stop, this, that, or the other, it's usually in response to a fact that I've recited, that I've researched, that I know to be true. Okay, they've never heard of it before. The sound of it makes them recoil in horror because it makes their entire life sound like it was meaningless up to this point, because they've been fighting for something that was so obviously and stupidly wrong. And so therefore they don't listen to you, and they yell at you or call you a name, so conspiracy theorist or something of that nature, and proceed to leave the conversation or block you on social media or something of that nature. And then they proceed to continue to live their life, living that lie, and then their health starts failing them, and they start wondering why they don't have any friends, particularly no friends that think differently to them, and they start feeling really lonely and depressed, and they start contemplating suicide. So then they go to a pharmaceutical doctor who diagnoses them and gives them a drug whose side effects include murder-suicide, and then they kill themselves. So when it comes to climate change activists, the problem is going to sort itself out. I'm saying, all right.
Well, that's exactly what happens, though. It's a flow-on effect, isn't it? They go and they get diagnosed with some sort of manic depression situation, and then they given these suicide pills, these mass murder pills. That's what's happening. That's why your style is very good, the way you manage to add humour into the information, because when people wake up to the harsh reality of what's going on, it's hard for them to get a grip on what's happening, and it really takes a toll on their mental health, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we've got Vitrola13 in the chat here says, I call BS on the people who parrot, that which you resist persists. If you don't resist, you will die. And I believe they're absolutely right, because the mode of resistance, okay, like if you just think about historical context, okay, if you resist, you persist. You mean like how the Americans resisted England and got rid of them? You mean like how the Allies resisted the Nazis and got rid of it? What you resist persists. I don't understand that mentality, because there's almost nothing that I can find on the historical record that backs it up even once. Oh, these guys resisted these guys and those guys persisted nonetheless. It's like, that's not what happens at all. I mean, occupations happen all the time, and then eventually they get resisted and then they get thrown out. That's the lesson of history. What you resist does not persist.
And if you follow the herd and the sheep get led to the slaughterhouse. And that's what seems to happen. So, you have to be a bit of a renegade and do your own research and take your own path. Even when it comes down to people's own family as well. They try and explain this to people at Christmas time, and it turns very hostile. And, you can't just conform with everybody else's opinion just to please them, because that's what some people do. They're a little bit weak-minded, they don't want to rock the boat, so they tend to just agree, even when they know that's not right and it doesn't sit well. They'll just go with the flow. We need more people showing a bit of a backbone here, speaking their mind and telling the truth. It's like what was said, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And we need more of these acts. That's the only way that we'll be able to survive or prolong the devastation of this New World Order.
People are overly sensitive, and that's why they react so much, because they don't have self-esteem. And they don't have self-esteem because they haven't committed any esteemed acts. Okay, that's how you get that. If you're proud of yourself and you're proud of the things that I've done, I mean, it's very, very fun when people try to tell, oh, you just have to be right, Vinny, or you're just arguing for the sake of arguing or something like that. And I say, you're actually just saying that because you don't know how to argue, and you're losing the argument. Ergo, you shift the goalposts or throw out a logical fallacy in order to derail the argument so that you can emerge as the victor, ironically, disingenuously calling me the one who's attempting to get victory at any cost. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. Don't tell me I'm simply trying to win. That just means I've already won, and because you're using that tactic, okay?
Absolutely. And a lot of people, their ego gets hurt. They don't want to admit they're wrong. They don't like the idea of their government lying to them and mainstream media pulling the wool over their eyes, because they've been living this for, all their life. And then to turn around and admit that, it's a real blow to their self-esteem. So it's easier for them to just carry out the lie and keep defending what they've been taught. So, there's so many actual, problems that come into this area. People's lack of understanding is one of them, and then people's ego is another. So, I mean, the corruption is rampant and the attacks on the people. But, they say we're in an age of awakening, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, when is the time where you feel most sleepy? Is it right before you go to bed, or is it just after you wake up?
When you wake up, isn't it?
Well,
that's right.
I mean, because you want to just go back to sleep because it was so nice, wasn't it? And
that's a very good analogy too.
I've known a lot of people who were part of the movement. Okay? They suddenly decided that, hey, it's okay that pedophiles are going to run society and control my children's lives. That's okay. As long as I've got money, I'm just going to go and work and make my money, and life's going to be fun. It's all right. And you got cannabis activists who are like, well, so what if the government's creating money out of nothing and then giving it to private bankers who then charge us interest on that same money that's ours? So what? As long as we've got weed, So what if we don't have any human rights? At least we can get blazed. And I'm just sitting here kind of, I spent the last 10 years sitting with wise elders, talking with authors and lawyers and doctors and some of the most educated and fringe thinkers in this world, as well as all the people who are at the coalface on all number of fronts of activism across this planet. And I've developed a perspective that is a tad more holistic than the over-specialized research natures of many commentators. And that's why my perspective, I think, on the show is so very, very different to all the other shows. Okay, there's plenty of shows out there that are fun to listen to, but there's very few that laugh at their own demise. And there's very few that tell you that the point of the broadcast is for one person who's listening to the show, who's listening to a story, who's listening to somebody's awakening, suddenly clicks and realizes that you share those exact same attributes, and then your job is to stop listening to the show and to start doing something in the real world now, because it's just too late for people to sit back and consume content, not when they could be creating itself, to consume content when they could be doing something unique or special that only they can do. This show's about trying to give people the potential back into their own hands and realize that, hey, you're not made of glass. You can take a hit. You can go out there and you can do risky things. You can say things that people don't like, and you can still survive. You know, many people have, many people do. But going back onto this other point we were talking before about climate change activists, and it's been on my mind quite a bit lately, and written a number of posts on Facebook about it. This one here, climate change activists thinks they're anti-establishment as the world's governments, corporations and media roll out the red carpet for them. As Mark Twain said, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect.
Absolutely. I actually read that quote too the other day. It's right on point, isn't it? And it plays right into the government's hands, what they're doing. Their agenda, it suits them to a T when they have these climate change activists, Extinction Rebellion. You know, they're getting out there and they're protesting this. That's exactly what they want. So it falls right into their lap, and you know, we have to approach things delicately, because some of the activists, their heart's in the right place. You know, they don't want to boil over. They think the world is going to cook them alive, when, you know, that's a very false narrative that's being pushed. So, you know, it's pretty difficult when you're going up against these people and trying to explain it to them. No, look, you've just been sold a lie. And that's exactly what's happening there. And they see Greta, and they push her out onto the world stage, and you know, people are reluctant to criticise a young woman as well, and you know, her mental issues. You know, you come across as really cruel and nasty if you go against Greta. So I think that's all done by design as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood.
I mean, it just feels like a little green Nazi. Like, honestly, I need like a little armband with a little green leaf on it, or something like that.
Jawohl, we are going to save the climate. Alright, the climate's been changing for 4 billion years, but now I want it to stop.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
I mean, I love the meme that was like pictures of children in the salt mines, the cobalt mines, coal mines, and lugging pictures of water miles down streets and stuff like that. And there's a picture of Greta, and it says, one of these children claims that their childhood has been stolen. Okay.
Right on point. And a picture speaks 1,000 words, doesn't it? And yeah, the child labour, and your children carrying water, and they're saying, "I'm sorry about your childhood, Greta." Yeah, it's
Yeah,
right on point, isn't it? There's children that are really suffering out there. They got their ribs sticking out, they're malnourished and starving, and
and then you've got Greta.
I mean, the irony of that, isn't it? And some of those memes, they really cut through a lot of the BS, don't they? And help people to see it in a new light.
Just showing the hypocrisy of people, and just giving them a dig. I mean, I look at it like this: whether you know you're doing this or not, it's completely and utterly irrelevant. What you're actually doing is what you're actually doing. Take responsibility for it and then stop doing it, right? And by that I mean being a climate change activist. And this is another post I put up because there's been a lot of my best posts are simply replies to idiot posts. Right, because I try to be reasonable and not insulting or anything like that, and I fail a lot. But world is warming due to human-caused climate change. The apparent solutions are world government owned and controlled by private bankers who make money up out of thin air and don't have to follow their own rules. With an AI supercomputer system monitoring and controlling all other human activity from birth till death in a perpetual panopticon prison state for the good of the planet and future generations. Paraphrased. Okay? Now question, has the world ever warmed before due to other factors? Yes. If so, how can we rule out every single climate factor? We can't. Why? The sun, the clouds, the sea, the 600-year ocean lag that releases carbon dioxide after increased solar activity. The last 1,000 years of climate history and ice core samples show massive fluctuation in temperatures in both long, cold, and warm periods. So, I don't personally see how selling every human soul to bankers, who make money up out of thin air, that control the UN, world governments, and global media is a good idea. Nor do I think letting them surveil and control every aspect of society while following none of their own rules will solve the alleged climate crisis. However, if indeed human beings being slaves to elites and adopting satanic narcissism is the core solution to climate change, I'd still probably choose to err on the side of caution, because as the last 1,000 years of human history shows, societies that adopt that kind of belief usually wipe themselves out. I don't see the appeal.
That's written brilliantly and right on the money there too, isn't it? And you see a lot of people are speculating it's George Soros that's funding this Greta and really pushing this movement. So, and the bankers, and that statement that she made, if we can save the banks, we can save the world. And you notice when she hasn't got a script in front of her, she's always lost for words and has to pass the question off to somebody else.
Perhaps you could ask a question of somebody else at the table?
Yeah, yeah, that's right, isn't it? Lost for words.
Like, honestly, my Greta impression is just fantastic, isn't it?
Right on the money. It's like she's in the same room. Yeah, that's what's happening. And it's good to, add a bit of humour to it. Otherwise, like I said, people, they get really frustrated by it.
It's another thought I had a couple of days ago, is that if you're talking to people and you're portraying information to them, doesn't matter how compelling that information is, doesn't matter how good it is, doesn't matter how fact-based it is. What matters is how that information makes you feel. Okay? If you sit through a movie and you feel nothing, you don't cry, you don't laugh, you don't gasp, that kind of thing, do you remember that movie? No.
Would you?
Okay? So when you're giving people information, unless they're laughing, crying, being shocked, or being afraid, and going on a whole emotional journey through with you while you're presenting this information, they're not going to be able to remember it, or at least not as well as perhaps they could.
Very important, isn't it? That's a really good way of looking at it. You've got to, touch on their emotions as well, so it sinks into their subconscious levels, and then they'll remember it. They're more likely to have that in their mind later on. When they're hit with disinformation, they'll be able to think back, and that'll come to their frontal cortex there. They'll be able to remember, and that's really good for them to carry that forward. And if you can do that, that's a real skill to be able to convey the information and really touch people on a deeper level.
I think the way I did it was, well, my best friend, his mum just died suddenly yesterday, and that's why I'm so tired today, because, you know, when your best mate's all alone at home and his mum just died and stuff like that, you go round, you hang out with him, that kind of thing, you give him a couple of drinks and you keep him company, you give him a few laughs and stuff like that. And so what if you have to drive home in the middle of the frickin' night? So what, you know? It only happens once. And I was just thinking about how grief makes people feel. And I've felt it before a number of times, the loss, that death, especially sudden death, can really affect the human being. And you never forget those things. And so when, like, the Christchurch Mosque massacre happened, my perspective was pretty mixed. I was wondering about what information am I going to get out, or what conspiracy theories I'm going to go cover. And then it occurred to me that doesn't actually matter to anybody. It doesn't matter. 3,000 dead on 9/11, big emotional outlet, all right? Huge people, huge amounts of people really, really upset about that. 1 million dead Iraqis directly after 9/11 that was blamed on them, which they didn't do. No emotional outreach, no emotional support. Why is that? It's because you didn't personally suffer through it. Nobody broadcasted 10,000 times a day on repeat, feel sorry for these people, isn't this sad? About the Iraqis, but they did that about the Americans on 9/11. And so the Christchurch Mosque massacre was New Zealand's 9/11, and we immediately got the New Zealand Patriot Act right afterwards.
My deepest heartfelt condolences to your friend's mother. Sadly, it's not until it's somebody you know that is tragically taken from us does it really hit home. But people are disconnected, aren't they?
I got to interview the president of the mosque, Bashir Khan, and had a good interview. Got him to laugh a couple of times, despite how tough things were. But it was such a emotional thing that, you know, when he gave me a hug after, I just burst into tears, mate. Yeah, I remember sitting at the airport on my way back to Auckland. I was just sitting by myself in a corner, just crying, just because it was so painful. Because you can't be around people who've seen and suffered such a direct loss without taking that on. And that's the way I do my shows, is I've got a certain amount of emotion, certain amount of empathy on my hands at any one time. So I'm back from holiday like today, right? So it was, I was talking to my mate Mike, and I said, bro, it's really convenient that your mother died before just yesterday, because my empathy levels were all down and gone, you know, for my holiday and stuff like that. That's why I go on holiday, because if I can't empathize with people and can't care about them while I'm interviewing them, I wonder what the hell the point is on the interview, you know? So yeah, I've been drained and then recharge, and right at the moment I've got my empathy levels right back up to full. So I'm helping people where I can, and a lot of people that have either listened to the show or been on the show have told me privately that they were thinking about suicide, or they were going to do it, and they didn't, because they had things put into perspective by having a bit of a laugh about it. And that's why it's so important to everybody who's doing good work, that is helping people, to keep doing it, you know, because you never know the consequences of not doing your work. But that means you've got to maintain yourself, because it's not a short game, right? Like, this war's of information or consciousness or whatever the hell's going on ain't going to be over tomorrow or next week or in 10 years. It might not even be over in 100 years. This I look at it as a multi-generational fight that I have to keep myself alive and have to keep my brain and my heart working, because if I don't, there won't be a subsequent generation being raised to continue this fight, right?
Yeah.
Don't burn yourselves out, folks.
Very good advice, and the work independent media is doing absolutely life-saving and giving people hope in times of uncertainty, because, you know, sadly there's so many false flags, there's so many staged events, people don't know what to believe anymore, and it's like the mainstream media, they keep crying wolf, and, you know, one time there'll be a real wolf there, but people won't know, and, you know, that's when people are slaughtered and they don't know what to believe anymore. So, you know, with the mainstream media pushing these events and so many lies, you know, one time they'll report on a real story, but people won't believe it, will they?
It'll be the boy who cried wolf. I mean,
Exactly.
even us conspiracy theorists and things like that. I mean, I've become a lot very jaded and cynical over the years, because that's what you're supposed to do as a journalist. You become jaded, you become cynical, and then your job is to put things into context for people, because you're able to look at the facts, no matter how horrific they are. And I recall somebody asking me, why would you want to watch the Christchurch Mosque Massacre shooting video? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do that? I don't understand. Why would a cop want to investigate a crime scene? It's because it's my frickin' job. Okay?
Exactly.
Period.
And people were getting in trouble for doing their job, weren't they, reporting on that event? People that were sharing the footage, ending up in prison. You had the police visit your home. You handled that very tactfully as well. And I believe one of your viewers said, next time they turn up, film it. And you did good at that. And they showed their names and their business cards. And they said they prefer that it wasn't uploaded to YouTube. And you said, well, we all have our preferences, you know, like...
Yeah, like I'd prefer to not be visited by the cops 5 frickin' times, you know?
Absolutely. And I've had that happen too. A few months ago they visited my house and they had no reasonable evidence for doing so. Sometimes it's just a fear and intimidation method because you're getting close to the truth and they just want to rattle your cage.
Yeah, and that's what I said, I think I had a question with interview with Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth, and told him that was, I believe, the point of the visits, because it wasn't just me getting visited, it was people all over the country all the time getting visited for things like, oh, what do you think about Jews on social media? Yeah. So, okay, like really, really creepy Stalinistic type shit. And I've never felt, as a journalist, as a man, as a human, never felt this afraid as to tell the truth as I am right now under Jacinda Ardern's government. Right?
Yeah, they're using dirty tactics, aren't they? And she's been ruthless, hasn't she? They even set up a hotline too for people to phone through, and I bet you there would have been a few anonymous callers phoning through mentioning your name as well.
Well, one can only hope. Including right in the middle of the very first stream, like it was the day that the day after it happened, and the news was 24-hour live streaming this stuff, right? And I was in the middle of a live stream I did with Ole Damagard, who's an expert on false flag terrorism.
Yes.
We got censored in the middle of a live stream. That had never happened to me in my life. I've been doing this 10 years, never been censored in the middle of a live stream. This was something new. Ollie Damagard's been doing this for 25 years, never been censored in the middle of a live stream. Okay? How did they have all these algorithms set and ready to go the day after the massacre?
Very
Okay.
organised, wasn't
It was a coordinated attack, I think, and I think disinformation agents were deployed very effectively all around the world, either be via their own useful idiocy or because of actual paid scumbaggery. I don't know which it is, saying that there were no deaths and the guns were fake and all of these other kind of things. And it's like, that's like saying 9/11 didn't happen. Sure, false flag terrorism is, in the name, false flag, but that didn't mean it didn't happen, because the best false flag is one where there are real casualties. You know, you can just go, hey, look at all these dead bodies and stuff like that. But whilst at the same time, I completely understand the perspective with the amount of crisis actors and things like that that have been exposed recently. You do have to keep a open mind about things, but to just come out and declare things immediately, you know, right as it's happening and stuff like that, when you haven't been there, you haven't done any investigations, and you're 10,000 kilometres away, I don't think you should do that, just as in terms of journalistic responsibility, personally. And I wrote down a list of things, little anomalies. These aren't in chronological order, of course, but they're just little anomalies to do with the Christchurch Mosque Massacre that I thought were really interesting, and might order them chronologically and maybe put them into a video one day. But would you like to hear the list?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, there was a gun ban in New Zealand introduced before the shooting, and that same gun ban was implemented 14 days after the shooting. Brenton Tarrant was an Australian citizen, not a New Zealander, but they took the New Zealanders' guns, not the Australians, because the Australians had already had the guns taken, of course.
Exactly.
Now, the Brenton Tarrant claims he got money from BitConnect in 2010. BitConnect which didn't exist at the time.
Yes.
Didn't even exist. He travelled to multiple war zones internationally. He was said to speak the local language so well that locals confused him for a local. He comes to New Zealand. He gets some legal guns. He acts crazy at a gun club and is reported to police. The police ignore the reports. Before the attack, there's a terrorism conference called Crisis X, Readiness and Preparedness. They specialise in doing drills, including fake bodies and blood. Facebook goes down for 2 days. The first live stream that Facebook does, after it comes back up globally, mind you, is this video of the Mosque Massacre. Complete attention worldwide on this. There were drills on the day of the shooting. The New Zealand Police Armed Offenders Squad were doing a drill. The Prime Minister was quoted as saying, someone in armed offenders uniform went into the mosque and started opening fire. There was also a sniper drill on the day. Foreign troops on New Zealand soil were given the shoot to kill orders. We had Chinese snipers and stuff like that training with NATO here at the time. The manifesto that the guy released was made illegal to view. The video that he released became illegal to view. Now, this is against the New Zealand Human Rights Act, where it's your right to share any information in any form. Okay?
Yep.
People who shared the video were visited by armed police. In one case, armed police were pointing guns at this person who shared a video's head. Right? Journalists reporting on the story got visited by police up to 5 times. That's me. Internet freedom was completely censored. You now can't say anything against Muslims, or you can't even say the words false flag, or you get immediately censored, or your videos do. I had a number of videos released at that time that had the title false flag, and they're all deleted.
Sure.
So they've censored internet freedom. Before this all happened, in order to do all that censorship and everything, all the algorithms were ready to go. You know, these are things that could take years, months in planning, at least, in order to have an instantaneous, oh, you've said this particular word, we immediately withdraw your video. Getting that into to work takes some time, but they were all ready to go the day after. And also noted here, I was censored in the middle of a live stream, which is very unusual. Can't say the words false flag, already talked about that. And there were conspiracy theories alleging fake guns or digital fakery / no deaths. And again, hats off to Max Egan, who did the best analysis of the Christchurch Mosque Massacre video, and all the and refuted and easily disproved all of the claims about no deaths and digital fakery and all of this kind of stuff. But he noticed a hell of a lot more freaky little anomalies in that video that weren't, digital or anything like that. It's more like crime scene investigation. Like, there was stuff going on there. There were handlers. There were people who got away, who were left alone, and stuff like that. Why is that? The inquiry into this massacre has been made secret. So the government will investigate it and keep its investigations completely secret.
Exactly, so many red flags.
The gunman himself, down to the last three here, the gunman himself pled not guilty. The gunman flashed a Masonic 666 hand sign to the media in the papers. And finally, we came to the real agenda, which was to confiscate New Zealanders' guns. All the previous assault rifles, even semi-automatic rifles, were all made illegal. And you could be arrested if you don't come in and hand in your previously legal firearms that you never did anything with. Despite the fact that 98% of the gun crimes that do get committed in New Zealand, and not a lot of gun crime happens here, get committed not by by unregistered weapons. Okay, so 98% of the crimes that are committed are not committed by gun owners, registered gun owners. So, who did they take all the guns off after this massacre happened? All the registered gun owners. What did the gangs say about this? They said, we're not giving up our guns. So what did they do? They then armed the police. Okay, and they said, we're not going to just use this for ordinary, policing and stuff like that. And then the very next day, it turns out that they were just using it for ordinary policing, pulling people over for a traffic ticket or violation or something like that and pointing an M4 at their head. Okay, so welcome to New Zealand, folks.
It's so blatantly obvious when you break it down like that through each one of those points. And it falls back into the old strategy, order out of chaos. And, they create the problem, they get the desired reaction, and then they offer up the solution, which is to take people's firearms. And statistics have shown where there's more guns, there's actually less crime. So,
well, on that point,
yeah.
The reason why there's more guns, less crime is the Israelis found this out very interestingly enough. This is an excerpt from John Lott's presentation. He's a statistician. He did the presentation, More Guns, Less Crime. And he showed that in Israel, at a certain point during the 1980s, there were these Palestinian attacks that would be committed with AK-47s. So some Palestinian terrorists would come in, they'd shoot up a mall or something like that, and the Israeli military found it was very, very difficult to counter that, because when they had troops on the streets or on street corners or something like that, the terrorists were at the advantage. They could just wait until the guy left his post and then do the attack, so they were always on the back foot and they couldn't stop these things. So they came up with an idea, which was to arm the citizenry, and they gave handgun permits to lots and lots of people in Israel. And one story that came in after this legislative change was of 3 Palestinian men who walked into a mall on a Monday, and they opened fire on the crowd with their AK-47s. And to their surprise, all the old ladies and old fellas and stuff like that pulled out their sidearms and started shooting back. And the two of the terrorists were killed. The third was badly wounded. Ambulance arrived to pick him up, and the ambulance staff reported that the terrorist was really upset. He was crying and cursing, and it's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he goes, nobody told us the old ladies would have guns.
Very interesting.
Okay, so if you give people the ability to arm themselves and defend themselves, and you teach them to be responsible, the likelihood that they're going to either A, commit crimes, or B, be a victim of a crime is greatly reduced. If you do the exact opposite, on the other hand, if you tell people to not be responsible for defending themselves, to palm that responsibility off to police, then people not only become the victims of crime a hell of a lot more often, but they themselves are actually less responsible and indeed more likely to commit crimes themselves.
Yes. Complete abuse of power, isn't it? And it was even George Washington that advocated the use of firearms, and everyone should bear arms in case a criminal government tries to take over, which that's what is forecasted here. It looks like there's a rogue elements of the government that are going to, take over, and people have to be aware of this. We have to defend our freedoms and liberties because we're losing them every day. And very scary prospects when you have the police here in Australia. They're bringing in the new shoot-to-kill laws with drivers. It's a very frightening scenario that's coming into play, isn't it?
Well, explain me that one.
It was brought in after the Burke Street car rampage. They're arming the police to the teeth.
I see. I didn't even know about the Burke Street thing. I've been on holiday on emotional recoup, so you're gonna have to update me the whole thing.
Yes, well, it happened. The car that there's no footage of a car going down Burke Street. The car rampage, and it all falls into occult numerology. It comes into 33 that were victims of the terror attack that they're claiming. And, they say that they kept showing the car going down Swanston, but no car going down Burke. It was all done by design to bring in these new laws. We've seen it time and time again. They stage these events, and then the legislation gets rolled out shortly after. And that's what we're seeing now. The police, they've got the new laws, they're armed with these assault weapons. And you know who they're going to use that against? The people. And we're all defenceless. We've got no way of protecting ourselves. After the Port Arthur event, they did the gun grab under the Howard government. And we're defenceless. And they like to use Australia as the prime example. It seems like, what we're facing, that, the government just keeps pushing to see how far they can get away with. So it's a devastating set of circumstances that we're under.
What I find very interesting is that Australia lost all its guns after a guy named Martin Bryant shot up the place. New Zealand lost all of its guns after a guy named Brenton Tarrant shot up the place.
Exactly.
Don't the names seem kind of like Martin Bryant, Brenton Tarrant, Brenton Bryant, Brenton Tarrant? It's I could turn it into a song, I guess. That's kind of one of my other skills and talents, is to sing and make terrible jokes that are inappropriate. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day and talking about school, and the most common phrase I was ever disciplined for was "quote unquote" inappropriate behaviour. And it's just like, yeah, I can see that, and I can see where my career's gone down. Because of said inappropriate behaviour, people don't like being told facts that disagree with their egos. because the ego likes to have an escape route. That's why it never admits that, you know, I've done something wrong or.
And you are very creative and musically talented. You perform with your band Vinny and the Vendettas, and you really give people confidence to step in and try out their own musical abilities. It's very inspiring. And what we're seeing now with the music videos, there's a lot of satanic symbolism being used. They're throwing up the pyramid, the all-seeing eye, covering the one eye. It's quite obvious. They're telling you in a matter of words. So they like to drop clues and hints, don't they, about who's running the game.
Well, actually, I think it's more closer to a getting your jollies off. All right. So, for example, one time I wanted to give my wife a DVD for Christmas, Deadpool. She took me to the Deadpool for Valentine's Day. It was great. And I wrapped up the DVD, put it in a little box, and then put the little box in a suitcase, and then wrapped up the suitcase, and then put the suitcase in a box, and then wrapped up the box. So each time she'd open something, there'd be something else. She'd open it again, there'd be something else. Open it again, there'd be something else. And the whole time, for a week, before I even gave her the present, I'd be skipping around the house going, hee. And she'd go, what? And I go, I can't tell you. Hee. All seeing eye in the music video. Hee. Masonic floor in your movie. Hee. It was just like I could totally see myself doing that if I was a ruthless criminal, sociopathic, scumbaggery piece of crap with no conscience and more money than God.
Yeah, exactly what they are. Great analysis. They shout out to their handlers. It's all done by design. That's the agenda that we're seeing. It's that's why they like to get off on people's pain and misery. They feed off these dark emotions. It goes back into the rituals that they like to perform, drawing in that dark energy. And there's plenty of it now. The dark energy, it's the level of evil is at an all-time extreme. And that's what they're saying. Massive cover-ups. We have all sorts, and they keep pushing these agendas. And we've got, illegal organ harvesting. They're pulling the plug on people prematurely. China, a lot of people's organs are being sold. It's all the devil doers that are in control of the planet. And that's who we're up against. It makes it so much more difficult to combat this, because they're very strategic in the way they roll it out, aren't they?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, about words. If I speak a word, you can't see that word in your head, but if I wrote the word, you'd be able to see me speaking it, that kind of thing, and there'd be some solidity to it, because words offer the ability to turn your thoughts into something audible, something communicable, something that essentially has meaning to it. Now, what's been happening in the last 100 years or so is meaning itself has been stripped from language, particularly language used in the news media. And I believe that the reason for this is because, like Orwell said with Newspeak, is that if you have an enemy that you cannot even describe in words, how are you ever going to defeat them? Okay, who are we up against? It's the ubiquitous they, right? It's not very specific. Oh, it's the Freemasons. That's not very specific because there's lots of other branches. Oh, it's the Jews. That's not very specific because there's lots of offshoots and stuff like that. Sure, all of these things are major power centers of the conspiracy that we're doing, but because they're all intertwined and interwoven and intermarried and all of that kind of thing, there is no head of the snake, all right? I mean, it exists, technically, and G. Edward Griffin talked about this. He called them the group, or rather Carol Quigley, Professor Carol Quigley, in Tragedy and Hope, called them the group. They have a group, and they have no name, because you cannot destroy something you don't even have a name for.
Very well said. And it's like the grand chessboard. The way a chess player would be a master at the game, you know, they understand time, and you know they understand all the calendars, the moon phases under a certain time and date. When they do a sacrifice, they can draw in maximum power off that. And you know, they have complete knowledge of us with all the tracking systems in place, all the data mining that they're collecting, the social media. They have absolute all-knowing knowledge and sacrifice. They're willing to make any and all sacrifices. You know, and that's how come the dark side's winning the game. And you know, we see it, Bohemian Grove, you know, they're all getting together, worshipping the Canaanite deity Moloch, and you can hear the chanting and how it's all done. It's all very satanic. That's what we're seeing, and plenty of ritualistic abuse survivors are stepping forwards. They're speaking up. I had Fiona Barnett on the show. She gave a really frightening insight into exactly what's being played out here, and it's very devilish, and it needs to be exposed right away. And it goes all linked in with the child trafficking that's happening. You know, that's happening on an industrial level, and it's all linked in through the royal family. We see Prince Harry and Meghan are vacating their royal titles. You know, some people are saying, you know, they're trying to escape that satanic life that they're living and prevent any murders that could take place. Others are saying it could be a diversion from the Prince Andrew scandal. So there's many angles.
That sounds a lot more like it.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in these families, you ain't ever getting out. It's like if you are in a CIA family, for example, you're in the CIA. All right, what's for dinner, Mum? I can't tell you. You know. So I'd find it very, very difficult, and that was why the Trump phenomenon, the QAnon phenomenon, and also the flat Earth phenomenon. 3 things came on the scene within a couple of years, and the entire truth movement that had been built up to that point got dismantled and destroyed, just like that. Suddenly everybody's either, I love Trump, I love Q, I love flat Earth, or they're fighting about it.
That's very sad, isn't it? When we've seen that with some of these events that take place, a lot of activists, they're all clashing and they're fighting over the details of these events. And that's not constructive. People should be working together. But it's like the government pours a bunch of petrol on the truth community and then just flicks a match and watches it all burn to the ground. You know, that's what's happening, and it's done really effectively. They bring in the flat earth, and then, you know, people are accused of that, and then they also bring in, you know, another psychological operation, agent provocateurs and COINTELPRO, people that act as if they're truthers and they're sincere, but then they tell half-truths. They've got every angle covered. They muddy the waters, and that makes it so difficult for people to, you know, dissect the information. So they're really playing this in a real mastermind fashion, the way they do that. And, you know, I'd like to think that people in the truth community would be a little bit more intelligent and could see this happening and play out and know not to buy into that, the arguments, the egos that get involved, people that they want to believe that they got the right answers, they're on the money, and then when somebody brings through their angle and their opinion, there seems like a lot of fighting takes place, and you think, hang on, that falls right into the enemy's hands when you do that. So we have to be more intelligent the way we go about things, because, you know, that's exactly what they want. They want everybody fighting and not working towards exposing the corruption.
You're right, but it's and about intelligence. But intelligence is not just about, you know, how much you know and that kind of thing. It's also about feeling, right? And just going, okay, are we at each other's throats? Yeah, we are. Does this feel good? No, it doesn't. Should we be doing this? No, we probably shouldn't be.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Emotional intelligence and showing true care. I mean, that's the occult principle that the elitists follow. They truly care about their agenda. They've pledged their family, their fortune, their future, and their lives to this goal. The goal of living forever in perpetual harvesting of all mankind and all of its achievements for personal gain. Right? They really care about that goal. And a lot of people don't understand that, and they go, why would somebody want more money and power? I mean, I've got enough. You don't know human nature, son. I mean, for frickin' heck's sake. So you think just somebody gets all the money and power in the world and go, I've got enough money and power now. I can relax.
Right. And as smart as they be, sometimes the dark side, they drop the ball as well. So that's what we have to hope for, that they keep making mistakes. Like with this Epstein case, there's a lot of hardcore skeptics that are against any conspiracy or truth topics. And then when they look at certain anomalies that come into play there, like the surveillance cameras being deleted on suicide watch and commit suicide, they're noticing red flags. So, that's what we need to hope, that they keep dropping the ball like that. Some of these people that are asleep, it's like the curtains have been opened and the light's starting to creep in, and then it's making it hard for them to go back to sleep. That's what we have to pray for. Because
my wife, I get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning on the regular, and my wife just wants to stay in bed, even though she's awake, right? And she doesn't listen to my show, ever. And maybe I like it that way, maybe I don't. But I can honestly say that there is nothing on heaven on earth that'll force everybody to get out of bed when they should do.
Yeah. And well, that's the case too. And what we're seeing as well, a lot of mysterious deaths. People have released information and then, they get suicided off. We see the Clinton body count, Seth Rich, and a lot of people, they go missing. People have to stop and wonder, what's going on here. They blow the whistle on certain crimes and corruption, and then they end up in prison, and the people that they were exposing are still free. So...
yeah, well, that's what happens when you look. But that's what the vast majority of people don't do.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, isn't it? They're just not looking into it.
Yeah. Anybody who looks into something will find something, And even the flat Earth thing was relatively interesting. A lot of the geometry and some of the ways that the sun rises and falls and things like that exposed a lot of very interesting questions about the shape of the planet and the nature of our reality and that sort of thing. But I'd already approached all of those when I looked into holograms, when I looked into fractals, when I looked into computer programming, and how our physical laws like gravity and things like that act exactly the same as the ones that we've created in a computer program. So, I think one person on an interview asked me once, so Vinny, just give it to us straight, do you think the Earth is flat or round? And I go, well, neither. I think it's actually a holographic fractal collection created by collective consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. Alright?
Wow. That was very articulate, the way that you broke that down.
Yeah, and for those people who don't know what the hell that means, a fractal is a repeating pattern of something. So let's say you see a hand, and then you zoom into the hand, and you see another hand, and another, and another. The further you zoom in, the more it keeps completing itself. And a hologram is information that is stored always, but at slightly less resolution. So you've got big memories and small memories that are the same memory, they're just smaller, less resolution on them. So that's the holographic fractal. And when you've got a collective consciousness that runs into play, you've got all this latent psych energy that everybody puts off, the vibe, basically. And it can change stuff. It can change how people feel, it can change how people act, and how people feel and how people act changes the world. And because of the hologram and because of the fractal, everything that we do has an effect not only around us, but throughout the entire fractal of existence.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I've looked into that as well. And the holograms, when we've been lied to all throughout history, you know, you start to think, hang on, if this is what they're saying, I'll have to start believing the opposite. Because, you know, the government and NASA, they're like a criminal that's on trial. They've been caught out in these lies. We've seen the green screens, and they keep pushing the CGI images out onto the public. Billions of dollars have been pushed through, and, you know, they're taking, it's one big tax fraud, what NASA's operating there. People deserve to see a picture of the Earth from space, but they don't show that. And, you know, they even stepped forward and said, oh, it has to be done that way. And, you know, that's very sinister, the way they keep pushing these computer-generated images, and they keep, you know, showing up their picture of the globe Earth. Even Universal Studios was showing that well before they even went to space. So, you know, people need to look at that, you know, fake moon landings, telemetry data going missing. There's a lot of answers that the public deserve. And, you know, Don Pettit coming forward and saying we haven't got the technology to go back to the moon, we destroyed it. I mean, if people don't look into it, I mean, there's so much you can delve into on that one. The Challenger, they said that exploded, everyone died, but we've got pictures of these people, they're still alive. Still, some of them are teachers. They haven't even changed their names. They're still going under the same name as before. I mean, there's so much you can question about that. And
Yeah,
if
I
they...
interviewed a NASA astronaut once, and he said that NASA stands for never a straight answer.
Yeah, I like that too. That's interesting, hey? And there's also another terminology as well, like to deceive. Yeah, that's really interesting, that there, when you look into it. So you have to give people credit for thinking outside of the globe and, you know, looking into flat Earth. It makes perfect sense. Engineers are saying, you know, they don't make the railway beams to bend. It's all flat. There is no curvature. You see a lot of the photos, they're using a fish-eyed lens. So, I mean, when you weigh it all up, it's not something you can just write off, the flat Earth theory.
Yeah.
And I had a discussion, like some of my listeners and donors are big into the flat Earth thing, and I'm not terribly into it because it's pointless to me. What do you mean it's pointless, Vinny, studying the shape of the Earth and everything? There's a lot of point to it. Okay, well, does GPS currently work reliably enough? Yeah? Okay, well, what does the Earth being flat, how does that change? Do I take a different route to work? Do I take different flights now? Does anything at all in my daily life change depending on what the shape of the Earth or dimension it's in? Nothing whatsoever. So why would I spend 100 or 10,000 hours studying the flat Earth, for which I could not practically apply any changes in my life whatsoever? More to the point, whilst I'm doing that hundreds and thousands of hours of research into the flat Earth so I can argue people to convincingly, convince them it is flat. How much advancement along the lines of Agenda 21, 5G implementation, Geo Engineering, and political corruption, and globalized, industrialized pedophilia, how much progress has that made while I've been talking about the flat Earth that will change absolutely nothing, ever, in any way, shape, or form, in my daily life or anybody else's? Unless, of course, they haven't yet figured out that the government lies. Like, if you fully believe the government, and then someone showed you flat Earth evidence, that'd freak you out, man. Seriously, you'd be like, oh my god, you'd have a full-blown awakening on your hands. But I'm not sure if it works exactly that way. I mean, that's the thing. It's just about priority. My priority is just not getting exterminated, and whether or not we debate about the flat of the earth isn't going to stop us from getting exterminated and subsequently enslaved by ruthless criminal sociopathic scumbaggery. So I just put it in the whole, okay, yeah, it's in the possibility box.
Yeah, which is a really good approach to take. But what it does show is just how far the lies go, even to what we're even living on, at the extent of it.
Well, one thing that perplexed me was if that had legitimacy, it means that the conspiracy has been going since basically the dawn of time. But also in the Middle East somewhere, where was it? Edessa. There's a old Jewish temple, about 3,000 years old, and on the floor is a zodiac, with a Jesus figure in the center of that zodiac holding up a blue-green ball. Okay? That's several thousand years ago. And even then, they knew that the Earth looked like a blue-green ball from space.
Yeah, well, I give people credit for doing research on it, regardless. It shows that they're willing to not just, take the first idea and run with that. They're looking into it. The Bible even states, that there's firmament and a flat, motionless plane. It's a very interesting conversation, but yeah, sometimes it reaches a dead end, because unless you can run tests yourself and look into it and come up with a conclusion, it's a never-ending debate, when there is more serious matters that we can be looking into, that we can really expose and hopefully get justice out of. Like there's satanic pedophiles, the Luciferian rituals that are occurring in government, all the scandals throughout Hollywood that people are seeing. That's interesting too. What people, hopefully will be brought to justice. We see people like Tom Hanks buying a child from the father and, using her as a sex slave. Ricky Gervais stepped forward at the Golden Globes and released some information, about the rampant pedophilia that's openly taking place. I mean, that can be exposed, and then we can help some of the victims right away. I mean, that's some of the avenues that we should be looking at, helping and saving some of the children and rescuing them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Ricky Gervais says a lot of important things about how we take things, and people get really offended when you talk about the pedophile class or any kind of conspiracy, and they take that being offended means I'm right. And Ricky says, we've got to stop this recent culture of people telling us they're offended by something and expecting us to give a fuck.
That's right. And what about the victims of Kevin Spacey? They've all ended up deceased. It falls back into the mysterious deaths.
Well, that's a house of cards right there, mate.
Isn't it? That's right. Well said. So, I mean, sometimes they push it too far when they just eliminate people. Hopefully that does scare the sheep and make them question it further. As you said, they don't look. That's the sad thing about it. But it's very alarming.
Well, that's the irony of the woke movement. Like, I'm so woke. I believe what the media tells me. I do what the government tells me. I'm so woke. It's like, no, you're conformist. Okay, and that's what this green mask is about, man. As soon as they've got the power, they'll do the things that they're not going to do. They're not going to say right now. All right, so there's these green communist scum, and they're scum. They're absolute dangerous. They're morally bankrupt. They've got no qualms about lying or hurting people's feelings or destroying whole nations. They don't care in any way, shape, or form. They just want the power. And once they've got that power, they'll do what they want with it. I mean, let's just face facts here. Climate activists are killer communists in disguise. They don't have the power to murder you yet, but they will, and that's when the green mask will come off. And I think it's really important for people to, challenge this on a regular basis. If everybody's like going on about climate change and going, and you don't say anything to oppose it, these people are eventually going to hold all the power and they're just going to kill you.
Exactly. And, they have all these control measures in place. People are weakened with the fluoride that they're drinking, the Monsanto and the genetically modified organisms, and not to mention the vaccines. When the population is weak and destabilised, they're much more easily to be controlled like that. And, we've exposed a lot of this on the show. I was recently all throughout the news, the Daily Mail, making headlines every day. It was a media frenzy. I had a doctor expose that there's, herd immunity, that's a myth. The vaccines, they can be fatal. And people should definitely exercise caution before they take that path and look at vaccination as a strategy for improving their health. When, diet and nutrition is a much better way to prevent any sickness and disease. So they have many measures in place. The government's using all their weapons against the people to keep us unstable and off balance. And that's what we really have to expose and try and overcome.
You're right, and it's about, I think... Man, I need to go to the bathroom and take a piss, actually. I can be right back in a second, but I've got to finish this thought first. Because we're dealing with a whole bunch of psychological techniques. It's about warfare. Okay, now warfare has 3 elements to it: psychological warfare, economic warfare, and kinetic warfare. Now the Chinese are very, very good at this. They'll brainwash you with their propaganda. The party is good. If you don't like the party, you're bad. You go work camp. And then if they can't manage to convince you with that, then they go, the party is good, here lots of money, and then stop questioning party. And you go, oh, okay, that's economic warfare. But if that don't work...
Well, that does it for today. Please consider making a donation to the We Are Change PayPal account. Your generosity helps keep this channel running. And I'll catch you next time on the We Are Change talk show, where we expose corruption, one episode at a time.